Good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock on the dot, so I'd like to go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. My name is Rakia Nance, and on behalf of the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's meeting to discuss the Our Water program. I'd like to note that tonight's meeting is being recorded, and later on in the presentation, we'll explain how you can access a recording of the meeting along with the presentation slides. I'd like to start by introducing some of the people that you'll be hearing from on the call tonight. From the Department of Public Works, we have George Heiner, Lynn Berry, and Kim Clooney. From HDR, in addition to myself, there's also Ed Shea and Jessica Sneed. Tonight's meeting, of course, is being hosted on Zoom, and here are the features and tools that you can use during the meeting. We're going to ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and to ensure optimal bandwidth, please turn off your camera. We will be presenting quite a bit of information this evening, and we are going to be stopping along the way to address any questions. If you do have a question, please use the chat box to enter it, and we will address them in the order in which they're received. You may also use the raise hand function to ask a question. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to share information about the Our Water program. We've received interest from several residents in the community, and we want to note that this meeting is non-binding, and we're not asking you to make any type of decision tonight. Instead, this meeting is designed to help you learn more and make an informed decision on whether connecting to public sewer is right for your community. And it is a community decision whether to connect to public sewer, and we'll explain a little more in detail what that process is like further on in the presentation. Here's an overview of the information we'll be discussing tonight. First, we'll talk about Our Water as it relates to the Pendennis Mount area and neighboring communities. We'll follow that up with funding and cost. Then we'll discuss the application and petition process, followed by next steps Q&A.
How do I increase the volume?
And with that, I'd like to turn things over to George Heiner with the Department of Public Works, who will discuss background on the Our Water program. George?
Okay, thank you, Rakia. So I'm George Heiner with the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works in the Utility Design Division. And I'm going to talk in a couple of spots tonight, but in the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to go over what the Our Water program is, a little bit of background on the program, and what our goals are. So the Our Water program is a long-term strategy that Anne Arundel County DPW has developed to help maintain the health of our waterways and strengthen our water resiliency. Can you go to the next slide? So there's 5 components to the program. The first one is the small system upgrades. This is a set of projects where we're going to be looking at taking over small private wastewater treatment plants and upgrading them to kind of state-of-the-art treatment technology. Another aspect of the program is our ongoing stormwater management work. This is run through our Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration, and they've been doing a lot of outstanding work in watershed restoration projects. There's going to be a groundwater resiliency component to the program, and wastewater treatment enhancements. So over the last 10 years, the county's invested quite a lot in upgrading its wastewater treatment plants. They're performing at a very high level now, and we're going to look to continue to improve that performance as we go forward. And the last piece that we're talking about here specifically tonight, which is the septic to sewer connection program. So why are we interested in connecting septic systems? The main purpose, and this is really coming out of the effort for reducing nutrient pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. So that's essentially nitrogen and phosphorus, but primarily nitrogen. The conventional septic systems and even the best available technology nitrogen removing septic systems are not able to remove as much nitrogen as our wastewater treatment plants are. If you go to the next slide, I think we have a comparison of that. Oh, sorry. I'll get to that. Sorry. Anne Arundel County overall has more than 40,000 septic systems, 13,000 septic systems in the critical area. That's almost 25% of all the septic systems, all the critical area septic systems statewide. And it's a significant source of nitrogen in the county. So you can see on this chart that wastewater is 35%, stormwater 32%, septics is 13%. As I mentioned before, we have a robust stormwater program that's been making a lot of improvements. There have been a lot of improvements in the wastewater treatment sector, but we really haven't made any significant progress in reducing loads from septic systems. So that's really where the focus of this program component has been. You can go to the next slide. So this slide basically compares the nitrogen load from one household based on whether it's a conventional system, a nutrient removal system, or whether it's one of our wastewater treatment plants. So on the far right hand column, we'll just talk about that one is, if you're in a critical area, because you're close to the waterway, the assumption is more of the nitrogen in the wastewater is going to actually make it to the waterway. These estimates are taken from the state's approach. So 18.56 pounds per year per home for a conventional septic system. If you have a nitrogen removing unit, it's 9 pounds because they typically do at least 50% removal. And then you can see our wastewater treatment plants, the permitted limit is 3 pounds, would be equivalent to 3 pounds per household. But our actual performance has been about half the permitted level over the last several years. So the discharge from one of our facilities is roughly 1.5 pounds. So, I mean, this is really where there can be a significant improvement if we're able to make some inroads on connecting the 40,000 septic systems. You can go to the next slide. So what are some of the benefits for the program? So for the public in general, and I just saw a question pop up, so I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I forgot to mention, as Rakia said, we're going to cover a lot of stuff. So we do want you to feel free to put questions in the chat box about anything. And we're going to stop at a couple different places within the presentation to get caught up on questions. So I guess the question I think I saw there for a second was, what is the critical area? So the critical area is a state-defined environmentally sensitive area. It's basically within, I think it's 1,000 feet. Actually, the exact definition is, I'm forgetting it right now, because no, it's 1,000 feet is the next one. I'll look that one up and get back to you. It's closer to 1,000 feet. Within 1,000 feet of tidal waters. Okay. Please go back a couple of slides. Okay, let me get caught up on that one when we pause for questions on the definition of the critical area. So the basic benefit for the overall public is there's going to be less nitrogen discharged into the bay. As we make progress from the county level in connecting septic systems, we're going to maintain compliance with the state requirements. And there will also be a more direct benefit to the local waterways. On this map, we have all the county's major watersheds. Nearly all these watersheds are listed as impaired for nutrients and other pollutants. So really separate from the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, there's impairments on all the local waterways. And as we are able to connect more septic systems, it's going to help those local waterways. Can we go to the next slide? So what are some of the benefits for the homeowner? We've gotten this question at a couple different meetings from different communities. So what we're going to share here is sort of what are some of the things that we've heard people say, and under what situations. So the one possible benefit for the homeowner is your tank and your drain field are sometimes sized based on the size of your house or the number of bedrooms in your house. So there are times when if you're trying to do some sort of building addition, that your septic system becomes a restriction on that. Another type of benefit is the drain field occupies space in your yard, whether it's in the front or the back, that you can't really utilize because it's got to be reserved for that. Most places have to have a reserve drain field. So, there's a benefit to that area being free for different uses if it's not being used for drain field. There may be a positive impact on your home value. This is really difficult to gauge, and we would normally say that if you're really interested in knowing, it's probably best to talk to a realtor about that. Can you go to the next slide? There's also some more environmental, I guess, related benefits. If you're off of a septic system, or a whole community is off septic systems, there's less impact, of course, in septic systems interfering with your drinking water wells. I don't recall how much of this area is on private well water right now. As I mentioned before, there's improvements to your local waterways that come from not having that septic discharge. And you also avoid some costs that go along with maintaining septic systems. And on this next slide, these are some generalized costs that we've developed from some research. The traditional septic systems are less expensive to operate on an annual basis than the BAT is best available technology. That's a nitrogen removing septic system. Those are a little more expensive to own and maintain because they have more mechanical equipment and they draw more energy. So there are some costs associated with maintaining your septic system, and of course, if you connect to the public sewer, you wouldn't have those costs in the future. So what is the septic to sewer connection program? And what we've developed here, and we'll talk more about a little bit about the history of the program, but we'll talk more about the program eligible areas and certain changes to the code to make it more affordable for people in areas. So this map is showing the blue areas are the eligible areas for the program. So to be an eligible area, an area to have one of several different key characteristics. One was to be in the critical area, and I know I said I'm going to look up the definition for that while we're talking. The other is that it's in what the health department defines as an on-site wastewater management problem area. Another one is that it's in an area that we consider a septic connection area, and that really means an area that we've developed a conceptual layout. We've been looking at septic system connections for several years now, and we have very concept level layouts for a lot of different areas. So those are really the key, and you can see here on the blue area, these are the areas that are eligible in the program. So we'll go to the next slide. So our overall program really here is that we have a need to protect our waterways, improve the environment and water quality. We've developed this new process, and we're going to talk a lot more about how that process works. Where a neighborhood can show interest, we've developed an application process, and we're going to talk through different funding options and the petition process. So there's a new, a modified process on how to make that connection. And our overall goal in the program is to connect 6,000 septic systems over the next 30 years. So we're hoping to connect about 200 homes a year, which is a sizable number. But if you recall at the beginning and earlier, I was saying we have 40,000 septic systems in the county. So it's not necessarily the majority by any stretch. Should we go to the next slide? So just a little bit of background on the septic connection program. Our initial concept planning started many years ago with an earlier version of the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load requirements. That was looking like, at that time, the septic sector reduction goal was 50%, approximately 50% reduction in septic system discharges. So we started doing a lot of planning at that time to try to figure out, would it be even possible to hook up 20,000 of the 40,000 septic systems. So some of the cost information you're going to see tonight in the general layout areas are related to some of these early planning efforts that we made as part of that earlier program work. We then had a septic task force that was initiated. It had citizen participation from business groups, environmental groups, and some community groups. And that we talked about a lot of the challenges that we were kind of facing with this septic connection program. And we looked for input on policies, prioritization criteria, subsidies, incentives. And the work of that septic task force really kind of culminated in legislation that was passed at the end of last year and early this year to create subsidies for certain eligible areas and deferments. And we're going to talk a lot more about the details of how that works. And to start implementing this plan, we've developed this application process, and we'll talk about the application process as well. So you can go to the next slide. So I mentioned a little bit that you needed to be in an eligible area. So this is the same map we had a little bit earlier. The green area is all the county's planned sewer service area. The blue area are the eligible areas in the program. And you also are considered eligible if your project area includes an eligible area. So in this area, the Pendennis Mount area, it's eligible because it's in the critical area. It doesn't mean every single property has to be in the critical area, but it does mean the project area would have to include the critical area. So let's go. Oh, you already switched it. Sorry.
There's quite a few questions in the chat. I'm going to scroll back up. You addressed what the critical area is. There was another comment asking about 35% nitrogen load from wastewater plants.
Okay, so we need to, the critical area definition, I'm looking this up now. So it's land within 1,000 feet of tidal streams. Okay, so I think someone may have already responded to that one.
Okay.
Okay, please go back to a couple of slides, the load from 35%.
Rakia, could you use slide 9, please?
Slide 9.
So this chart was showing the way the load delivery, it's not too complicated, but it's not that straightforward either. So the way the
Let me make sure I'm on the right slide.
Okay.
I think they were wanting the one with the pie chart.
Oh, okay.
This pie chart. So the wastewater plant at 35%. Yes. So this slide was taken from the state's what the state has now issued, what they're calling a Phase 3 watershed implementation plan. And it has 2017 loads from the different sectors. And so that's where this chart was taken from. So was there a particular question about this slide?
It looks like the comment was asking to confirm.
Yeah, George, I imagine the general idea is that we're showing a pie chart here that identifies wastewater as one of the larger dischargers of nitrogen, and I think the history going back 2017 is the county has invested a tremendous amount into reducing that. So the next, I think we want to talk about how septic is the next slice of the pie that we can invest in.
Yeah. Okay. So I see okay. So do we have that slide in this deck, Ricky, the one with the wastewater discharges?
I believe so. It's toward the end.
Okay. So let's go to that one quickly. And I see some comments about wanting to get to the costs. We're definitely going to talk a lot about the costs. The majority of the presentation is about the costs. So just bear with us while we get through the other questions. This chart here, and this is sort of following up what Ed is saying, is showing the change in our discharge loads from our wastewater plants over the last 10 years. And so, yeah, while that 35% is still a significant piece, you can see our reductions over the last 10, we're at, a load that's about 50% of where we were 10 years ago. And our treatment plants are actually performing below what used to be considered the limit of technology. So while we're going to still try to improve that treatment at these facilities and the reliability, we've made a lot of progress in this sector. So.
All right. And the next question, how far below ground level is groundwater level specifically for Pendennis Mount?
I don't know the answer to that one. We'll have to look that one up.
All right. And we had a resident commenting on the septic costs, septic pumping, usually closer to $300 each pump, 2 to 5 years. There's a comment about gallons of raw sewage being spilled into Mill Creek and the Magathie River and other local creeks. Do well-maintained private septic systems pose less of a threat to the bay than locally managed wastewater treatment facilities? My guess is that our collective neighborhood nitrogen load is substantially lower than the local public treatment facilities load.
Okay, so there's a couple different pieces in there, so I'll try to break that up. So with respect to the sewage spills, those have happened. We're not going to deny that, of course. The county takes a lot of measures to try to maintain the system, and when we design new facilities like pumping stations, there's redundancies put in generators. We have larger pumping station wet wells. I can say, and I think I had this slide, I might have just closed it. We've had, so as a good comparison, so last year we had about 300,000 gallons spilled in 2020, which is a lot. I mean, we basically don't want to see any spills, but we're processing 32 million gallons of sewage a day. That's close to 11. I lost that number now. Is it 11 billion gallons a year? I think, Ed, maybe you can double check my number on that. So, while we take every spill very seriously and we do our best to keep those under control, the county has a pretty good track record when it comes to sewage spills. I know it may not feel like that when you see the notices. And I just saw in the news today there were some spills in some other jurisdictions. But our actual amount of discharges is relatively low. do well-maintained private septic systems pose less of a threat to the bay than locally managed wastewater treatment facilities? So, I mean, I think you can see some of that answer in that comparison of loads. Rikia, maybe you can go back to the bar chart. You know, so our systems are performing very well right now, far much more removal than you would get out of a septic system. So, you know, our septic systems, I mean, I guess if you think about this as there's sectors, we're trying to make progress in all these different sectors. And as you could see on the earlier slide, we've made a lot of progress on wastewater treatment improvements, but there really hasn't been much improvement in septic systems. So it's really not, I wouldn't think of it in the context of, so we're saying now septic systems are the problem. What we're really saying is this is a sector that we haven't made progress on. How can we do things a little bit different? My guess is that our collective neighborhood nitrogen load is lower than the public treatment facility load. Do we have well, let me research that one before I come back to that one, because I'm not sure we actually have that slide in our backup deck right now.
The next is comment about biosolids disposal. Sludge from sewage treatment plants or sewage treatment facilities is commonly spread on farmland.
Yeah, that's accurate. The biosolids is treated in accordance with EPA standards, and it's most commonly used on farmlands. That's accurate statement. Your septage, when your septage tanks are pumped, that septage is brought to the county's wastewater treatment plants, and it's kind of mixed in with the incoming wastewater.
Next set of questions have to do with pumping stations. How will sewage reach the treatment facility? Also asking where those facilities will be located. How do pumping stations fail, and what are the results? Also, the number of pumping stations needed.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. This configuration in this area is a little tricky, and there are, I believe, a couple stations that would be needed to get it into the public system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think I addressed a little bit about the failure, and if not, I can come back to that. But you know, there's mechanical failures, there's power failures, and there's capacity failures are really kind of your main failure modes. And you know, we try to address all of those with the design up front. And so, you know, all stations will have a larger wet well to provide some emergency storage. They'll have a backup generator. There's a bypass pumping valve vault that allows a truck to come up if there's an emergency. So we try to, you know, when you're doing the design, you got to think through all those potential failure modes and try to build redundancy into the design.
Looks like the next question is having to do with cost, talking about ranch fowl house and the wastewater pipe run, the circumference of the basement. The resident guests the cost will be around $40,000. I know, George, you said we'll get into the funding costs.
We'll talk about the costs, but it is possible that your on-site cost can be substantial depending on the configuration at your house. Yeah.
Next comment with regard to the nitrogen load, according to the previous chart, septics only account for 13% of the load. This should be on the other 87%.
Okay. I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit in terms of why we're looking at septic systems as part of the overall program. Residential sewage backup and flooding ozone. Okay. The county should pay for all of this. Okay, so I'm reading the comment, and I guess the average cost of remediation. So again, we will try to incorporate, all the best practices we can into a design to prevent a spill or a backup. But those things do happen. I'm not going to say that they never happen, but we do our best when we're designing the system to look at those features. And I guess a general comment that the county should pay all the expenses associated with public sewage programs. So I guess that's part of a slightly broader discussion, and we have some people from utility assessments that are going to talk more to the finances, but the water and sewer utility is an enterprise fund, and so our activities are funded by the users. So our water user rates are going into those wastewater treatment plant improvements and other factors. And so I don't think your property tax is used for those water sewer projects. I mean, maybe you guys can confirm that with utility assessments. So
I can confirm that the utility fund does not receive any money from property taxes. It is all from the users. That's all capital projects, all operations and maintenance, all the chemicals, everything is paid for by the utility ratepayers.
So while not every area works that way, there's a little bit more separation here in Anne Arundel County than perhaps some other places. And not to keep coming back to this, but we've made progress, significant progress in these other sectors. So this element of the program is to try to be looking at how we might be able to get more septic connections. I think we've had less than 300 septic systems connect over the last 10 years. So if you compare that to, say, the reduction in nitrogen from the wastewater plants is down 50%. I mean, I understand we're not really trying to pick on septic systems. I don't hope it's not coming across like that. But in terms of looking at a strategy across different sectors, this is a sector that we haven't made a lot of progress on.
Right. Other comment to address the cost. We will be doing that in a few minutes here. Another comment. Looks like septic causes much lower nitrogen loads than county systems, and then also a request to describe the non-point source analysis. How do you know the sources of nitrogen?
Okay, it looks like septic causes much lower end loads than county systems. That's going back to the pie chart again. So, I mean, I guess I don't want to get really bogged down in the granular aspect of the data, but the pie chart that I showed you, which was taken from the state sources, that wastewater sector includes treatment plants that are not run by Anne Arundel County. Okay, so that total, I don't remember that number right now. I need to research that a little bit. But that number is not the county's total in terms of the DPW facility. So if you go to the final slide again, Ricky, I'm sorry, with the recent performance. Our current wastewater discharges are about 180,000 pounds. Not this one, the one at the very end that had the bar chart over the last 10 years. So our loads are around that 180 to 200,000 pound range. I think the state's estimate from that septic system, that pie chart was close to 400,000 for septic systems. What makes that chart a little difficult is it includes the wastewater sectors, from facilities that the county doesn't control. So I hope I'm not getting too granular, but that's what's underlying the pie chart. Describe George, the non-point. Yes.
Can I add to that just a little bit. Also,
Yeah.
keep in mind that the county currently has, I think, would you say 40,000 households that are on septic units. And the water reclamation facilities are handling about 140,000 households. So, of course, their numbers are going to be higher even with a lower discharge limit due to the quantity of waste that they're handling.
Describe the non-point source analysis, please. How do you know the sources of nitrogen? So the numbers that we're presenting tonight are coming from the state's basis for estimating nitrogen loads from septic systems. So their typical assumption is 23 pounds per household, and then they use these delivery ratios to estimate the impact on the waterway. I'm not actually familiar with the details of how the state developed that 23.2 pounds per household number, but that's where those numbers are coming from. And the state has been using methodologies like that throughout the Chesapeake Bay program development in terms of the phase 1, phase 2, and now the phase 3.
All right. Next comment is just, again, looks like the residential septic systems are an immaterial fraction of the total that is already down substantially over the past 5 years.
So I guess I would just respectfully disagree with that they're immaterial. I think that they are a significant sector. They're not the largest sector. They are the sector that we haven't made progress on, and so they are also a sector that not too long ago the state was telling us they wanted us to see 50% reduction. So I think we're not looking at that kind of a program, anything close to that kind of scale, but we are trying to look at how we can change the connection process to make it more affordable for some communities.
Okay, I'm going to defer the next question into the next pause, the next break that we have to address questions, and then we can move on to this next section of content.
Okay. So we had an earlier question about what would the layout look like, and that we would need multiple pumping stations. So that's an accurate statement. There's a couple different areas, and when we're showing these maroon colored boundaries, these are from the concept layouts that we did many years ago. As I mentioned, we started looking at whether it was possible to connect up to 20,000 septic systems. So we don't have any specific project in mind. As Rikia said, this is just an informational meeting. We're trying to let people know what the program's about and how it works and roughly what we think the cost might be. In this particular area, the connection point is up at Whispering Woods. And so there would have to be a series of pumping stations that would need to go together. That would make this somewhat complicated area to serve, not impossible. But it would kind of be interlinked, I guess, is probably the best way to explain it. So we have a blow up, I think, on the next couple ones. So this is a little bit more detail just on some of the areas so you can see. And we developed these layouts based on, this was a very concept level layout. So we looked at sort of the topography and whether it looked like we could drain areas to a centralized pump station. We did not look at any existing neighborhood boundaries or HOA boundaries or anything like that. This is really just a kind of engineering level assessment of what seemed to be feasible. I think we have two more here. Yeah. And for the most part, the flow is going to be going kind of to the northwest to get over to that Whispering Woods area. So one thing that's a little different in this one from some of the other areas is that I think really we want to be building our system from the existing, infrastructure out. So they'd be kind of from Whispering Woods back to the southwest. And that kind of means this project, if it was all of these areas, and it doesn't have to be all those areas, would it need to sort of be in different stages. So okay, so our next is a pause for questions. I know we have a lot of people that want to see the cost, because I know from all of our other presentations, that's what people are really interested in. I know there's some participants here that want to discuss the relative merits of the different sources. What I'd suggest is that maybe that we go through the rest of the presentation this evening, at least about the costs and the questions about nitrogen sources and why we're looking at septics. I'd be more than glad to stay on after the end of the presentation to talk about that in more detail. We have some other backup slides, but we still have quite a few slides to go through in our presentation. So if I just ask you to bear with us, because I think we would probably I think there's a lot of people that want to hear about the costs, and I think it would probably be better to move on to that point, and then we can come back to sector specific questions if you have them later on. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ed Shea. Ed's with HDR as a consulting firm that's been helping us with a lot of different aspects of this program. And Ed's going to describe the different costs that are involved in making a connection and potential funding for those costs. Is Ed muted?
And if you're talking, we can't hear you.
I think Ed may not be on the line. I saw him in here earlier.
Yeah. All right. Well, I can pick it up, and when Ed is back on, he can.
Okay, let's do that.
He can take over. Let's just do that.
Oh, I see him there. He's at the bottom.
Is his audio not working?
I don't know. It just looks like a phone and muted.
All right. Well, why don't I'll just pick it up, and then when Ed can come in, he can come in.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a couple different costs. So there's different components to the cost in the project. So there's a public side cost, which is the county's cost to install the public infrastructure. There's a private side cost, which is the homeowner's cost associated with redoing, disconnecting the septic system and then bringing a line out to where the public sewer connects. And there is also the capital facility connection charge, which is basically a one-time charge that when you connect to the whole capital system, there's a charge. And that charge is used to fund all sorts of capital projects throughout the system. And then there's going to be your monthly user connection, your monthly, your quarterly rate for usage. If you go to the next slide, so we frequently get a question about what happens to septic tanks. What happens to my septic tank? So your septic tank has to be abandoned in accordance with the health department's requirements when you make that connection. This requires the services of a licensed disposal contractor and a liquid waste hauler. We have the link there to the health department's more detailed requirements, but essentially the systems can be crushed or filled and abandoned in place. They don't have to be physically removed. So if you go to the next slide, we're showing on this slide the average costs per household for all of the different layouts that we had done. As you can see, there's sort of a curve there. In this particular region, the projects are expected to be more costly because of all the pumping stations that we talked about. So we'll have a little bit more detail about this. I see someone in the chat was commenting about a presentation we did on another meeting. So what we've been, I'm not reading that closely, but what we've been doing is, these concept level layouts and costs that we've developed. So we have some idea of where we think the costs are going to be within a particular area based on these layouts that we've done before. So we usually what we're doing is we're showing, this graph, which was the aggregate graph of all the areas that we looked at, and we're trying to show where we think, your neighborhood is sort of relative to other ones. So in this case, this is on the more expensive side because of the extra, because everything has to be pumped. And then there's a longer connection to get up to Whispering Woods. So we go to the next slide. There's also an on-site component, or the private side costs, which we referred to on the other slides. And those are the costs that are borne by the homeowner as part of rearranging their septic system, decommissioning the septic system. This slide shows information that we've received from the health department for those locations where there have been connections. I mentioned there haven't been a lot of connections over the years, but there have been some connections. And the health department shared with us, they administer the Bay Restoration Fund. We'll talk a little bit more about that for septic connections. And so we made a chart that really tried to show what frequency some of these costs are. So most of the on-site costs seem to be in this $3,000 to $6,000 range. But you can see there's a pocket of costs of people. It's not insignificant that end up paying, anywhere between $14,000 and $18,000. How much your on-site cost is very site specific. I think one of the commenters before was indicating they thought it was going to be more to that. That's a possibility depending on how your site's configured. Some of the things that affect your on-site costs we've listed here: your property, the size of your property, the distance from your house to the right-of-way. So if your house is really set back a good distance from the road, the county's clean out is going to be up by the roadway. So you're going to have to get out to that clean out. The topography of your property, and some people have costs associated with either driveway or landscape restoration. So it's difficult for us to say what your on-site costs are going to be. So that's why we just sort of present this information. This is what we see from the information that we have available. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so we're going to pause really quickly for questions. And I think we had some. So Ricky, I lost track of where we left off for questions.
So you requested to hold the nitrogen related questions to the end, request to go through their presentation first and then respond to questions at the end. A resident posted some notes from the Pines on the 7 meeting.
Okay.
Looks like for now.
Okay,
Oh,
I think
no,
we're,
I do have one question that was just sent to me. What are the costs associated with monthly or annual fees? Would costs be based on use as it is in the more progressive communities across the country? For example, gallons of water used in winter months equals sewer usage charges throughout the year.
could you read that again, please?
Sure. What are the costs associated with monthly or annual fees? Will the cost be based on use as it is in the more progressive communities across the country? For example, gallons of water used in winter months equals sewer usage charges throughout the year.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We will talk about that. So I'm going to just defer that because that's not. I'm just as likely to give an incorrect answer as a correct one on the billing question right now. So
Okay. Just a few more questions that have come in. Next one is from a resident who is a realtor, and all her questions are in relation to how this affects the sale of property and how the cost is transferred to the next owner.
okay, that we are definitely going to talk about in an upcoming section where we talk about the deferment options and the annual assessments.
Okay. Next question. How long would construction to full operation take?
So, normally we say at these meetings 3 to 4 years for a project. Now, what's a little different here is that we would have to have several projects. So this would really be a lot. If all these different areas were going to connect and eventually get up to Whispering Woods, I mean, it could be 10 years in the process, because each individual project, probably construction at least, is going to take a year and a half. And now, if we knew we were going forward with all three, we could be working on designs concurrently. So, I would guess 10 years is probably the longest. But I don't think, when we're saying a normal sort of one standalone community would be 3 to 4 years, this would be more complicated than that. So it would take a little bit more planning and sequencing. Please explain
Next
how.
question. Please explain how a grinder works. My experience is if the power goes out, the grinder doesn't work, so no bathroom use during a power outage.
So I think that's mostly a true statement. Now, a grinder pump. Do we have the slide on the grinder pumps in here, Rikia? At the back, maybe. So a grinder pump is, we would use those in a particular area where we couldn't do a gravity sewer. Yep, that's the picture. So it's a small pump that goes in. Right now I don't remember how many of these areas we thought were going to be grinder pumps versus a gravity sewer. And so the question was, okay, if your power is out, does your grinder pump work? So no, if the power is out and you don't have a generator at your house, that grinder pump is not going to work. Can you still flush the toilet? Yes, up to the point where that tank is full, right? And then once your tank is full, it's full. So from a practical standpoint, if you were to lose power, you would try not to use the bathroom, right? But I think you could probably still use it a little bit if there was an urgency, but you wouldn't be able to pump out of it at that point.
Okay. Next question. How is community defined for purposes of submitting an application and voting?
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I guess I'm seeing some questions. I think when I said 10 years, I didn't mean 10 years for each project. What I meant was if there was a sequence of 3 separate projects, that from where we are now to where that last project might be finished, that could be 10 years. I don't know if I misspoke or if that was misunderstood. We would normally say the process from where we are now, which is an information meeting, to actually having a completed project would be 3 to 4 years. So that would just be one project. Okay, so what I'm just trying to say is this is a little bit more complicated than, and so it would take a little longer. We will talk a little bit more about how community is defined for the voting and the application. But in a petition process, ultimately what would be happening here is the residents within an area would be petitioning the county to extend public service. And in the petition process, the residents define the project area. So we can work with you to help define a project area. But that project area is ultimately, from the petitioners. And we'll talk a little more about this. There's some important stuff to know about the petition process and the application process. So let's, I guess, get to that piece because I don't think we've even got through the rest of the funding stuff. I see some other questions about the septic system sector, and I'm going to come back to those if that's okay with the group here, because I think I think I'd like us to get through the cost information so everybody can see that. And again, I can stay as long as anybody wants to talk about the background of the program and why we're working on septic systems.
George, this is Ed. I'm back if you want me to pick up this next group of slides.
Yeah, that would be great. I need a drink of water. Thank you.
And I'll just mention the comment about grinder pumps. We do expect a significant number of grinder pumps would be needed to serve this area just because of the topography. And I know there was that one question in the chat earlier on about changing raising the level of the sewer in the basement. That's the type of situation that would normally be handled with a grinder pump. So you'd have to avoid the disruption inside the house, but then you have the grinder pump outside the house to handle that. Okay, so potential funding sources. The Septic Task Force that George mentioned earlier initiated legislation to allow the county to offer a subsidy for a percentage of the project cost. So that's the public side cost to construct the sewer in the right of way, the main sewer. The state has a fund that homeowners pay into now. So the Bay Restoration Fund is the name of that fund that's administered through MDE and currently through the health department. Bay Restoration Fund grants can be used to offset the on-site costs and also to offset the capital facility connection charge. So the idea here is that the upfront cost, as much as possible, could be handled by these existing grant programs. The county is working with the state to also help offset some of the assessment. So the assessment's the portion that's paying for the public sewer construction. And the county is also looking for ways to take advantage of state revolving fund loans and other low interest loans to keep that assessment cost as low as possible. So going to the next slide, we talk about the potential project subsidy. And this is being awarded based on a ranking system that evaluates different factors and benefits of a certain project. This was written into the county's legislation, and that's going to help select one community over another. It's also based on available funding. And then generally for household income less than $300,000 a year, up to 25% of the per property cost. So a particular homeowner's share of the public sewer construction cost, 25% of that could be offered by the county. For households with income greater than $300,000 a year, it's a half subsidy, so up to 12.5% of the per property cost. And this is going to be used to reduce the annual assessment portion of the cost. So this is a brand new feature. This was not available in the previous program for septic conversions, and this came about through the legislation. So a little bit more on the Bay Restoration Fund grant program. We talked about how it's to assist with the private on-site costs. It may also be available after the sewer main is extended. So after the sewer is constructed, the main homeowners are required to connect, and that's when the funding becomes available to reimburse those costs. And it's administered through the health department. That's how the program has been administered to date, and that part of it would continue forward. Depending on income, funding with the BRF grant could be up to $20,000. So that's significant. It covers most of typical on-site costs that we showed earlier, plus the capital facility connection charge. State funding for the program is limited each fiscal year, so it's not guaranteed, but it's been a fairly stable grant funding source for several years. And the funds are actually reimbursed directly to the master plumber, the contractor that you hire to do the on-site costs. Go on to the next slide, Rakia. So again, just a more clear explanation of how the construction costs become the assessment. The construction costs from the county's engineering study, plus the design, any kind of easements that need to be acquired for new infrastructure, construction inspections, the county's overhead, all of those project costs get rolled into the net assessable amount. And this would subtract any future connections. So in particular, the Pendennis Mount community and the adjacent communities are somewhat interdependent. So depending on the project that was actually formed and those interdependencies, if there's a sewer going through the neighborhood that benefits other neighborhoods, if it was sized to handle the flow from other neighborhoods, that will be subtracted out from the net assessable amount for that particular community. And then interest also gets rolled into that net assessable amount and is formed into an assessment that's paid over 40 years. So previously that was paid over 30 years. The new legislation made it possible to pay over a 40-year term. And then just a few assumptions on the assessment. Again, it's a 25% county subsidy for households up to $300,000 a year income. There's an option to defer up to 50% of that payment, and we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. For elderly, low income, or permanently disabled, so the county's definition in the code of elderly is 60 years old. Usually we get a couple laughs out of that definition, but that would enable somebody to defer 100% of their assessment to the future. And then $15,000 BRF funding available for on-site costs. So for household income greater than $300,000, it's a half subsidy, option to defer 50% of the costs, and just half of the BRF grant funding is available, $7,500. Vacant lots do not get a subsidy, they're not offered the deferment, and they are not eligible to receive a BRF grant. So the cost ranges, which depend on a variety of factors. At this time, if we were looking at just the county subsidy, not doing deferment, the cost is expected to range between about $1,900 and $3,100 annually. So that's the assessment that we talked about. If the homeowner takes the 50% deferment, that would reduce the annual cost substantially to between about $1,100 and $1,700, the difference between the blue and the green bar. And then the next option shows a household that did 100% deferment, basically shows the cost of the sewer usage fees. So typical quarterly bill, if you look at it on a monthly basis, it's about $35 a month, but it's billed quarterly. So over a year, that's about $420. So the person who is taking the subsidy and 100% deferment is still going to be responsible for those sewer usage fees every quarter. And so that's why that blue bar is around 400. And then you've got some other scenarios there for the higher income households and vacant lots. So the assessment options, the homeowner's private costs, the on-site costs, can be paid down with the Bay Restoration Fund grants. 100% of that can be paid upon connection. The capital facility charge can also be paid with the BRF grants. It can also be financed over 40 years in annual payments. And then the assessment, like we said, it's paid over 40 years. The balance of any deferred portion is due upon transfer of property or at the end of 40 years. And homeowners receive a separate assessment bill. So it's not part of your tax bill. It would be a separate bill that you'd receive annually in the beginning of the year. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Kim, and she's going to talk a little bit more detail about some payment deferral examples.
I'm Kim Clooney. I am the business manager for the Bureau of Utility Operations. So there's two different deferral options that are here, and this is not necessarily that you would choose one or the other. There's specific requirements for the 100% deferral, but the partial deferral would be available to anyone that is a residential property owner in the project area for these projects. And what this does is it's a deferral on that total per property assessment. So just using an example, if the total amount of that 40-year total assessment is $98,000, that would give you a yearly annual assessment of $2,450, which would just be the $98,000 divided by 40 to get that annual payment amount. You can defer up to 50% of that total assessment. So that would be able to defer up to $49,000. It is up to the property owner to decide whether you want to defer or not. You don't have to defer anything. You can defer up to the 50%. That's totally the homeowner's option there. So if you took the 50% deferral, your yearly assessment would change from the $2,450,000 a year to $1,225 per year. That deferral is due when you transfer the property. So if you took the 50% deferral and you sold your house after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever time, at the time of that sale, you would need to pay back that $49,000 deferral. The next homeowner would take over those payments of $1,225,000 per year until the 40 years is up. All right, so we can go to the next one. So the next one is the full deferral payment, and this is for qualifying owners, which would be elderly with income requirements and those with permanent disabilities. This one works a little bit differently in that in this one, instead of deferring like a big lump sum of that amount, you would defer the individual payments each year. So if you had this, you wouldn't use the other deferral option. You would just have that annual payment of $2,450,000 a year, but it would be deferred while you lived in the house. Or if your spouse lived in the house after, if you were to pass away. So your yearly assessment for your house would be $0. When you sell the house, you would be responsible to pay back those individual deferments, and not, it still would be a lump sum, but it would not necessarily be the same as with the partial deferral. So for example, after 10 years, you would be paying back $24,500, which is that 10 times the $2,450,000 annual payment. Once the house is sold, the next owner would continue paying the $2,450 per year until the 40 years is complete. All right, next slide. So this is just giving a little side-by-side comparison for the elderly and disabled based off of when the house is sold. So if the house was sold if you had this 50%, the far right-hand column, no matter when that house is sold, that $49,000 deferment would need to be paid off. However, if you have if you were eligible for the elderly and disabled deferment. After 5 years, you would be responsible for paying back $12,250. After 10 years, you would be responsible for paying back $24,500. After 15, it would be $36,750, and then after 20 years, it would be $49,000.
All right, thank you. I do want to address, looks like one of these questions you probably answered, but I did want to go back and review one question having to do with the assessment. It's asking, with the annual assessment, does this mean our costs will change annually? And if so, how will this cost be determined?
So the annual assessment does not change annually. Once that is set, that's going to be the same payment for 40 years. So basically what we do is we take the entire cost that it costs the county to do the project, which includes the fact that the county takes out loans in order to do this. They're either bond funded or state low interest loans. So that interest is included in the cost of what that project is for the 30 years that the county is required to pay those back. Once we have that total cost, we take that divided by the number of properties or EDUs if there's commercial properties in the area. But if it was all residential, we would just take the number of properties divided into that total cost, and that's how much each property would be responsible for paying. And then we take that cost and divide it by 40 so that you pay it off equally over 40 years.
Okay. So the other question was, what happens if I sell my house during those 40 years? Am I still liable? I believe you addressed that when you're explaining the
Correct. That would transfer with the house to the next owner. So you would pay for it while you are the owner of the house, and then it becomes a settlement cost. That they prorate if you sell in the middle of the year. But the next owner would be responsible to pay that the following year.
Okay. Next question. We appreciate the transparency on cost. Can you highlight the benefit to the transition?
George, do we want to handle that later with the other questions?
Because we're almost through. So if you can bear with us for just a little longer, we can come back and talk about the benefits in the sectors a little bit more. Yeah. So we will come back to that question. There's the last question. So the cost won't be predictable changing. So once the assessment is set, it doesn't change, I think is Kim, what you're saying.
Correct.
The
only cost that would go ahead, George.
Well, I was just gonna say, so we're showing you what we think the cost might be in 2021 if a project was formed, and going forward, we would be progressively updating those costs. And then when we got, and we're going to talk about this in the petition, to where you're doing a formal ballot, then we'll be really trying to project out what we think the construction cost for this project that is going to be designed. And so there's going to be a little bit of churn, I would say, from the cost that we're talking about now, as if and when a project went forward. But when the final assessment is based on the cost that the county incurs to do the project, and so that is based on whatever we paid the contractor, whatever we paid the design firm, and the overhead. And once that's set, that annual amount is consistent after that. Did I say that right, Kim?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the application and petition process, because what this program really is what's really has happened is that there have been changes to the petition process. So there has always been a process in county code for people who are on private water or private sewer to request extension of public utilities to their neighborhood. Okay. And as we've sort of touched on, and you've seen from the other slides, because the county the water and sewer is essentially self-funded, the cost to make those connections are passed on to the homeowners, right? So if you're doing a water petition, there's no subsidy, there's no partial deferral. It's a reimbursement of the county for the cost to provide water to that neighborhood. What's different about this program, and why we're talking to people about it this year, is the subsidy aspect and the partial deferment aspect are unique to septic systems within these eligible areas. And the intent of those changes was to make it more affordable for people, with the hope that more people are able to make connections. Because right now we have very few septic connections that go forward. So there's a lot of potential for projects. As we mentioned, there's 40,000 septic systems. There's at least 20,000 that we think could be connected. We wouldn't be able to offer a subsidy necessarily to everybody that was interested in at the same time. So we have developed this application process that's going to work in conjunction with the petition process, and I'm going to run through that really quickly. So we're really at the very beginning of the beginning here in step one, which is we've had some interest for some people in the area, and we're coming out. We're trying to give an informational meeting. We've been doing this. We started in the summer. We're probably doing these, on a pretty regular basis up into November, just trying to let people know about the program and know about what the costs look like and how it's paid for. If there's an interest in a particular an area for a project, we would want them to turn in an application, and we'll talk about what is in an application. It's not particularly rigorous, but this is just for us to kind of put a name to a potential project, and then we're going to rank the potential project so we could decide where we should direct the subsidy in a particular year. We would come back to the community with a little bit more detail on a cost estimate and some new costs as a follow-up. And at that point, the next step, really step 3, would be for the community to decide to send in the formal petition. So at that point, you're kind of entering into the formal petition process. There's forms that all the homeowners have to sign in the project area. And at that point, it would come over to us in engineering. We do a preliminary engineering report and develop. It's essentially also called the schematic design report, which would further refine the costs, nail down things like where we would put a pumping station and what we think the costs are going to be. And we would present that at a public hearing, and our utility assessment group, that's Kim's group, would prepare a ballot for people to vote on. Now, it's important to understand that in order for a petition to be approved, you need a majority in approval. So 50% plus 1. Okay. Once a community goes forward, everybody has to connect in that community. So the 51% can make the 49% connect. So that's an important thing to understand as you talk about this on a community level. That's how the petition process works. But we would present a ballot. If the majority vote for it, we will proceed with the final design, do the construction, and the community would connect. If you want to go to the next slide, Rakia, this is a little more detail on the petition process. Again, this would be after we would have a second meeting with the community about a particular project area. Okay. The community would file a petition, or a neighborhood would file a petition. We would do a preliminary engineering report here in our group in design. There would be a public hearing where we would present the cost information, the job, the proposed project, how long we think it's going to take, and the cost. A ballot sent out, and then the ballots are sent back to the county, and they're counted. If you don't vote, if you don't respond to the ballot, it's counted as a no. You can go to step 6. If the vote goes forward, then the county proceeds with the final design, and then we advertise for construction, and then we hire the contractor. The construction's done. When the work is complete, we send a letter out to the residents that says it's ready for connection. At that point, all the residents have to connect in the project area within 9 months. And the assessments usually begin the next calendar year. Now, if you recently installed a septic system or you have recently put in a nitrogen removal system, you can get an extension on that connection. So it could be longer than 9 months, but you would still be paying the assessment. So it's an extension on the connection time frame.
George, just a few questions
Yeah.
related to the previous slides that you just discussed I'd like to address. First one is, we have a voluntary community association. How will a majority vote be determined?
So each property gets a single vote and within the project area. So the project area does not have to conform to the community association boundaries. The project area can be whatever. It could be a subset of the community association, or it can be larger than the community association. So we kind of get that question a lot. It's we're not looking for these to be community association sponsored projects. It's helpful for us to be able to communicate with the community association, but it's the project boundaries aren't set up along those lines unless that's the way the residents want it. The next question is, am I correct that you are approaching communities as a means to pay for your project? So that's not exactly correct, because if you recall, what the petition process is a request from residents in an area to extend public sewer to their area. And because the utility the projects have to be financially self-sufficient, and that's the way the code is, then that's why the residents have to pay. That's why they reimburse the county. Yes, they're paying the county, but what they're doing is reimbursing the county for the cost of extending service to their properties. So it's not really, it is, yes, a DPW project, but we're doing that project as the result of a request from the residents through the petition process. So hopefully I kind of clarified that. DPW right now does not have a project plan for this area. There is no capital project that we are planning to be doing. And as we've tried to explain, the real goal on this whole new program was to make connections more affordable, and hopefully it's a good fit for it's a fit for communities that maybe it wasn't a fit for before.
The next question does the 50% approval mean 50% of those voting, or 50% of all of the community households?
Yeah, so it's 50% of all the property owners in the project area. And if you don't respond yes, it's counted as a no. Is there a distinction between the two Pendennis Mount areas? In all likelihood, because there's a physical highway separating them, they're probably separate efforts. So yes, but I guess in theory, if both areas wanted to join as one joint project, that would be possible also. There is a economy of scale in projects, so that larger projects are generally less costly per house than smaller projects. However, as you can imagine, it's a little trickier for a larger project to get that kind of communication level on the community level.
And kind of related to that, the residents asking if you could please be more specific about what the project area is.
So can you, so maybe go back to the area map. Let's try that. So if the best way to think about this is probably, I see a question about so I guess I would just want to emphasize, so we don't have a proposed project. Okay, there's not a DPW proposed project right now. What these boundaries were really from a planning effort that we did several years ago when the original state guidance was that the county needs to reduce its septic system loads by close to 50%. Okay, so we went back as part of a planning effort on our end and tried to look at where could there possibly be 20,000 septic systems that could actually be hooked up to the public system. Okay, and that's where these boundaries showed up. Okay, so we kind of went through, we had some different criteria on how we drew these boundaries that we could probably adjust if we were doing it today. I see there was a question about why some areas were excluded. I think the most common thing that ended one of our layouts was a lot of large lots. Okay, when we first did these concept layouts, we sort of figured, okay, if the lots are more than, I can't remember, it was half an acre, probably was more than an acre, that the project probably wouldn't be cost effective. And so we would kind of cut it off. Now, that's a good, we had to come up with some layouts, so we needed some criteria, but it when you get down on a granular level, it's a bit wanting in some cases. So this is why we would look more closely at this if we had an actual area. But the way to think of the project area is it's going to be defined by a neighborhood or a community, and it's going to be, okay, these houses, because this is what's on the petition, these houses within this area, we're interested in connecting to public sewer, and we're asking the Department of Public Works to do a study and tell us what it's going to cost. That's basically what's happening in the petition process. If a part of one of these zones is okay, how many households do you need? So a project area can be any size. So it can be 10 homes, it can be 5 homes, or it could be 50 or 500. Within that area, you need the majority need to be in favor of it. So it can be a subset of any of these areas. It can even extend beyond some of these areas if we were to take a closer look at it and there was interest. As I said, we had some real, broad criteria when we were developing these original layouts, and so sometimes there's some areas that dropped out, and we've asked ourselves some questions why particular streets isn't in and isn't out, so we can always take another look at that. Can residents who have recently upgraded their septic system, okay, I think this is more of a community question, but it's an excellent one for anybody who's had to do septic system improvements in your area. What that was. You don't necessarily have to share that in the chat, but we would certainly encourage you to talk to your neighbors about that. I know there was a chat much earlier about the pump out cost being around $300. I think that's roughly what we were figuring was at $100 a year, that it would be $300 to pump the tank out every 3 years. So that was $100 a year. For people who didn't get the mailer, will there be more information? We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Am I caught up yet, Rikia? Not yet. Okay.
There's just one more.
Okay, some people in Browns Woods did not get the notices. So we have had some trouble with the mailers. So we can look into kind of what happened there. It's possible that they just didn't get them yet, or it's possible that they weren't within one of these boundaries. So we'll look into that. But we're going to go in a few seconds. We're going to show you. Why don't we just go there to the community page? So we've set up this community page within our water page, and you can get to the page with the link that's shown. And this can be, you can share this with folks so they can go. What should be on here now is the slides from tonight's presentation, and the and probably within a week, we'll post the recording from the as well. So we would definitely encourage you to, if you have neighbors that couldn't make it, to go to this link so that they can see the presentation and look over some of the information. There's also a box there where you can let us know whether you're interested or you're not interested, and any comments about the presentation tonight. As I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of these throughout the summer. So, if there's pieces that were unclear, please let us know, because we really want to have everyone have the best information they can. So a couple of people I can see didn't get the mailer, so I apologize that. We'll try to figure out what happened, but we should be able. I mean, the link is probably going to be the best place to get information kind of going forward. And let's see, would it be required to remove the old septic tank? So no, most of the time the septic tank would be crushed and filled in, but it doesn't have to physically be removed in order to be decommissioned. If you look at the slide earlier, it has the link to the health department site. That actually gives you a lot more detail on the requirements. We kind of condensed it down to 2 bullets there. The link to the website is, so Rakia, that bit link right there would take you to the community webpage. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You can also get to the community webpage if you go to the main ourwater.org webpage, and there's a septic sewer page. When you enter your address there, it'll should say you're in an eligible area, and you should get a blue box that shows up that says, go to your community page. So the easiest way is to use the bit link, but you can also navigate to the ourwater.org page, and you can get to the community webpage there. Let's see, there was a notice about street repaving. Yeah, that wasn't from us, from our group, I should say. It's obviously from us, but typical front foot assessment is around 300 to 500 a year for communities. This could be a deterrent for new homeowners in our area. So the typical front foot assessment, I mean, the calculation is going to be what it is based on the cost of the project. The assessments for water petitions are generally lower because water projects are a little simpler. The piping is smaller. We don't have to worry about gravity drainage and the slopes because it's a pressurized water main. Everything can be 4 to 5 feet below ground, which is you don't have that kind of flexibility when you're working on a gravity sewer. And of course, you don't have a pumping station on a water system project. So if there's folks paying water system front foot assessments, the sewer system ones are usually higher. That's why it's been an obstacle for doing them. The next question was, do you have a timeline that shows from where we are today, the concept no plan to breaking ground? So if we go back a couple of slides, I think we had some timelines on that. Ricky, if you could go to the one that says application. No? Yes, that one. Let's see. So really we're looking at, by the time, these are the timeframes for these different steps. Okay, so, if you were to send in an application, 3 months for that application process, we're going to come back and talk to the community again with some updated information. Then there's a decision. The community or neighborhood has to decide, are we going to do the petition? That has to physically get signed by people. Then you have the vote, which is after we've done the study, we do the public hearing. Then there's the vote, we count the votes, and then we're going to do the design. So we hire a designer, we do the design, we get the permits, and then we have the 18-month construction. So, I mean, I think this is between 3 and 4 years. The construction part would probably take 18 months. So I'm kind of working backwards. Someone's saying they got a little late to the meeting. And can we discuss the benefits of the private system? So we're almost done with the presentation. So what I suggest is that we get to the final few slides, and then we can come back and talk more about benefits and areas. Okay. And so there's a comment about your septic system performs really well. Why? And yep. Our neighborhood is community property. How is the community property handled? So, community property, if there's no existing structure that is served by a well or a septic system, then it would be excluded from the project. If there is one, then it would be included in the project. And I guess the HOA or the community ownership would be that vote. So that property would get a single vote. And I guess that's probably how it would be handled. If the community association has the authority to speak as the owner of that property, then that's how that vote would get registered. Okay, so the last slide I think we had for everyone, 2 more slides, is just about the application process. I mentioned before it wasn't particularly rigorous. We're just looking for a way really for us to define a community, have an idea of what the project area is, and we look for a show of community support. And we have some flexibility on this, but mostly what we're looking for is that we don't have maybe 1 or 2 people out of 75 that are interested. And as a result of that, we're thinking there's a potential project. So if there's interest, we can use a letter from a civic association or an HOA. We could use if somebody has an internal poll or online poll that they want to share with us, we could use that. Another thing you can do too is just tell us on the community webpage if you're interested or not interested. We can see, those comments come in. So that's been pretty useful for us in order to get some feedback. Is, if it's you're not interested, you just say I'm not interested, and if you are, you can say you are, and then that way we can at least get a look at what the sense is from the people that have had a chance to attend the meeting tonight and take a look at the information that we're going to post in the near future. And sometimes, let's go to the next one. Sometimes we get questions about how the applications are ranked. So we did develop a ranking process for the applications. This was really for us to steer the subsidies towards the projects that we think are going to have the most impact. So it looks at things like the total amount of nitrogen we think is going to be reviewed, how many properties are in the critical area, how many properties are in on-site wastewater problem areas, which I don't think there's a lot of those in this particular area. And then, the dollar per nitrogen cost, a couple different cost metrics. And then we also look a little bit at vacant lots and how many households would actually need grinder pumps. The county actually owns and maintains the grinder pumps. So all things being equal, we'd rather not see a lot of grinder pumps. So that's why it's not a significant factor in the rating system, but it is a consideration. If somebody's saying it's not a wastewater disposal problem area, okay, I don't remember seeing it as one, so yeah. Okay, so I just want to go over, I guess that is the main presentation tonight. I appreciate everybody staying with us. I know it's been a long meeting. I'm going to ask our team to stay on the line to answer any questions, and but we really appreciate everybody's time, and again, I know it was a long meeting, but that's our main presentation. So any questions? We're going to stay on the take them. Rakia, can you go to the watershed slide? Let's just, because I know I've been pushing off the septic system questions a little bit. So let's just kind of jump into that a little bit. So this watershed in particular has a lot of septic systems, and so a significant proportion of all the ones in the county. And the waterway itself is listed as impaired for nutrients. So I know there were some questions about, how is this, why are we interested in septic systems, and what do we think some of these benefits are? So, why we're interested in septic system is it's a sector we haven't made a lot of progress in, relative to the other nitrogen producing sectors. And in a lot of our watersheds, there is a significant number of septic systems. So, trying to make those connections and lower those discharges to the local waterways is going to have a benefit, not just in the bay, but it should provide a local watershed benefit. And I think there was a question earlier, a little bit about, why are we focusing on septic systems if they're only 13% of the total? And I think probably the best explanation is that, we're developing a program that has different elements. And the goal of that program is to stay consistent with the state's Chesapeake Bay nutrient loadings. So we're compliant right now on the fact that we've had a lot of success with our wastewater improvements and with the stormwater program. Part of developing this long-term strategy is figuring out, okay, the county's going to grow. Maybe we're going to have some more urban areas. Maybe we're going to have more wastewater. So what is the plan as a multi-pronged approach that's going to help us stay in compliance? And so, that's where these sort of changes. Okay, well, what's an area where we haven't made any progress in, which is septic systems. Okay. And while the 20,000 septic system, I'm really glad we're not looking at hooking up 20,000 septic systems, frankly. One of the feedback from the septic task force when we met with them in between 2018 and 2019, what to get feedback was, how do we change this program to try to make it more affordable for people? How do we, because we could see nobody wants to do it because it's so expensive, and it is expensive. And what are some things we could change to try to make it a little less expensive? So, and that's where the changes really came from. So one of them was the deferment, which is to reduce the annual cost. Now, it doesn't waive 50%, but it just lowers that annual cost. And Kim kind of talked through the details as sort of how that works, the partial deferment. And the other part was the county subsidy, which, because the county sees a benefit in getting septic systems connected. That's why DPW is interested in providing the subsidy. But that subsidy comes at other things that aren't being done, right? So there's a balance that we're trying to make with the subsidy, between trying to use it to help make these more affordable versus other things that we need to do as part of our capital program. I don't
Hey,
know
George,
yeah.
I think a couple of the people, it sounds like they joined a little bit late. And so I wonder if, going back to slide 11, where we start enumerating the benefits, that might be a good way to answer those questions
Okay.
about benefits.
Yeah. Ricky, do you think you can jump back to slide 11? So, the broader public benefit, which is sort of where, DPW is interested in as, as the entity that is tasked to try to stay in compliance with the state's guidance and requirements, is that, as we're able to connect more septic systems, we're going to significantly reduce the load in those areas. And kind of bringing it to the local waterway. As I mentioned, this watershed has a lot of septic systems. It's listed as impaired. And so septic system connections and going to those treatment plants that are going to reduce the load in some cases by a factor of 4 are going to make some incremental progress towards the waterways. For the individuals, can you go to the next one? So these are very site specific to your property, but it's worth thinking about. And so the first one that I was mentioning is that in some cases, the ability to expand your house is going to be connected to your septic system. So your septic system in the drain field may be sized on your existing house, and some people can have an issue if they want to do an addition or some other thing where their septic system becomes an issue. That can depend on the soils. It can depend on the size of your lot. There's a lot of different things, that can come into that. The other benefit we were talking about is that, your drain field, however large it is back there, is taking up space in your yard. If you connect to the public system, that space is available to do something else. Now, that gets into, are you interested in digging out your drain field? And that's, that's going to be the homeowner's decision. But you won't need that drain field for your public sewer system because the connection will be out front and you won't need any of that stuff back there. And we mentioned a little bit the home value impact. Again, a realtor is probably the best person, not probably. A realtor is the best person to talk to about that kind of thing. And I think that's also real site dependent too. I mean, if you're at a lot that's maybe in a situation where you can't do something from a building standpoint because of your septic system, well, it's probably more valuable at that point than somebody else who doesn't have those restrictions. Let's go to the next slide. So there can be a lower risk of contamination. And this graphic, it shows the well near the septic system, but that's because we were just trying to condense the information on the graphic. What's a lot more common to see is like the wells in the back and the septic systems in the front, or the septic systems in the back and the well is in the front. And that's because there's you want to have a certain setback from your septic system so that it doesn't influence your drinking water well. So obviously, if your septic system's decommissioned and it goes to public sewer, that's not a concern. But that one's only applies if you're on a private well. We mentioned the waterways a little bit, and then lastly, it avoids the maintenance costs. If you go to the next slide. And this was another one that is kind of site specific for people. Kind of upgrading your septic tank can be costly. I think upgrading your drain field is more costly from the information that we've seen. And you do have some costs associated with your septic system. It's not the same level of cost. So I'm not trying to say that, but there is a cost to owning your septic system. If you have a BAT system, a nitrogen removal system, those are a little more costly to operate. I guess I want to add while we're mentioning this is, this program, as I've said a couple of times tonight, is really intended to help people understand how the petition process works and the changes to the code to make it more affordable. If it's not a good fit for a community, it's not a good fit. if people instead, if they want to look at BAT systems, I mean, we're not here to bash BAT systems or nitrogen removal systems. If if people are interested in that and they think that's a better fit, we would definitely encourage that, because it's still a 50% reduction in nitrogen removal, and there's still a benefit, to the waterways and to the bay, certainly from a nitrogen removal perspective. You do take on a little bit of higher costs with the BAT because it's a little more complicated system. Certainly, it's a lot more complicated than a traditional septic one, but it's because it does some more advanced, this little bit more advanced biochemical reactions going on in there. Did I catch up with the questions?
One more question just came in. I think these benefits need more emphasis. I'm sold on the proposition myself, but I need more help making the case to those reluctant to give up septic.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. I think, in terms of our purpose and our role here tonight, it's not necessarily, we want to encourage people to think about it. We're not necessarily trying to sell people on anything. But occasionally we are talking to communities where they looked at petitioning years ago and their memory is completely unaffordable. And, maybe it's still that it's unaffordable, but hopefully we gotten to the point where at least not completely unaffordable. And so, but I understand we're trying to, also we want people to understand the impacts that septic systems have. I think a lot of people feel that they don't have much of an impact on the waterways, and so I think that's something that we're just trying to explain, that there are impacts, and then that there are benefits. So I don't know if that addresses the comment. Okay, well, we appreciate your feedback. It was really a follow-up comment about providing more information on the benefits. So what's interesting is this was actually the first presentation where we talked a lot about the benefits. So I think we've been noticing that maybe we're not providing the whole picture, but we're definitely open to, we really appreciate the feedback, because we really really want people to just understand the program and understand sort of septic systems more broadly, and the bay restoration effort. So we'll certainly take that under consideration. Okay, so there's a comment that the assessment's probably going to be too high. That's valuable feedback to us. So hopefully this area was a little more expensive than some of the others, if you recall from some of the earlier slides. So, every area has to decide whether it seems like it's affordable or a good fit for their area. And at this point, we're really just trying to provide the best information that we have about what we think those costs might be.
So it looks like we're all caught up on questions, George.
I do have a question. I'm not sure I know how to use the chat. So could I ask the question?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Well, for some of our houses, they're all different, okay? And in our house, the plumbing stack is arranged to discharge out the back of the house, but our interior does not allow for the pipe to go from the front without modifying the foundation or the interior arrangements of the rooms. will the price, like if we have to put it out the back into the backyard and take it up the front, is that our cost?
Yeah, so that kind of that would be what we would be calling a private side cost in the terminology we're using in the presentation, and the homeowner would have to pay for that. We mentioned that there is bay restoration funding that may be available for the homeowners. That goes up to $20,000. That's dependent on income. So that can be used in a lot of cases to offset most costs. Most costs. But if you're in that bracket, actually, Ricky, can you go a slide with the historical private side costs? If you're in that bracket of homeowners that are paying, where their on-site configuration is costly, then that Bay Restoration Fund grant may not necessarily be able to cover all that. Now, because the county also has the capital facility connection charge. So for most properties, the Bay Restoration Fund should be able to cover your on-site plus the capital facility connection charge. If you're one of these homes sort of on the right-hand side of this chart, that the on-site costs are more significant, what would probably happen is you'd probably want to use, I mean, this would be the individual's decision, but I guess I'm just saying could probably use the Bay Restoration money for the on-site costs. You can finance the capital facility connection charge. So that can be rolled into your annual assessment. But if the plumber is probably not going to allow you to pay back over 30 years, right? So I think that answer to your question is yes, you would have to cover that as the homeowner. How much of that you would have to pay sort of
Thank you.
up front would be a little depend on the situation. But you can finance the capital facility connection charge with the annual assessment, with the public side project costs. Yeah, a lot of houses have that. I see the comment, a lot of houses have that kind of arrangement, and I do think it's really common, honestly, to see the septic system in the back and kind of in a well in the front. So and then that gets into, okay, well, how is that actually configured, like in the immediate environs around your house there? Okay. Well, if we've covered everyone's questions, I really appreciate everyone's time. I know it was a long meeting. You had a lot of great questions, so thanks for your time. So.